Well, thank you so much for joining us for the first of an adult forum series. Danielle is here with us because, well, you have great experience learning about racism and wanting to be an ally. An ally is a word for someone who is walking with and in solidarity with a journey, but it's not your journey. And so you can be an ally to the LGBT community, you can be an ally to people of color, you can be someone who walks with. And so, anything that you want to say by way of introduction?
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good introduction. Yeah, I also did my thesis project on relationship between law enforcement and the African American community. So
yeah,
I had to do a lot of research and learned a lot of things that I really wasn't aware of. So I think when you mentioned that we were going to talk about this in adult forum, I said yes. This is like something that is close to my heart, but also something that I'm still learning about, and that I realized like there was so much I didn't know, and so.
Yeah, and I think that's what Danielle and I and other people have been talking about, is that as white people, a lot of times we just really have no idea. We don't know what it's like to be a black person in America. We really don't know. And so a lot of times when we hear things that happen on the news, we're filtering them from our experience, our limited experience, and it's often confusing, and people will react in all sorts of ways, and there's a lot of emotions flooding around, and it just feels, I think, well, it's emotional. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of want to do this series to walk with you, because we're learning, we've learned a lot, and we're still learning.
Mm-hmm. And it can be scary. It can be scary to approach these conversations, because sometimes it causes us to look in the mirror and realize like that we've been a part of these things, sometimes like the oppression of other people, or benefited from the oppression of people, not wanting to, but because we belong to a certain group, or because we're part of a certain society.
Yeah, and I'll learn about something that is hurtful to black people, and I will think back to a time in which I said something like that, and I'm like, oh. And I didn't mean it, and I didn't know. And that's what we're here to talk about, and at least this first session is just sort of open our eyes a little bit together as atonement to some of the things we just really haven't thought about. And I like what you said about learning a new language. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, so like learning about racism, or learning about, like in this case, like an African American or black experience, is a lot about like learning a new language. And we're, Siri and I are not black,
no,
right? So it's just like, being like a native speaker. If I'm trying to learn Portuguese, well, I'm never going to be a native speaker of Portuguese, because that's not my culture, that's not where I grew up. But if I study, if I educate myself, if I practice, like I can learn that language, learn how it operates, learn what that experience is like. But it's hard. It means I might have to have a lot of conversations where I screw up, I say something wrong. It can be embarrassing. I can feel like a little kid again, but that's the only way I'm going to learn.
Yeah.
And that's a lot what we're approaching as white people, and what can be scary is like learning a completely different experience than ourselves.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to come at this with a sort of humble heart, to realize that for the vast majority of us, and I don't want to assume anything either about your life experience, but for a vast majority of people that I talk to and that I know, really, we don't know what it's like to live as a black person or a person of color in America. And a lot of times we filter the stories we hear about what's going on through an ignorant lens. And so it's just good to approach this time of learning with a little humility, and hope that we come out better human people, better people.
Yeah, try to be better people. And, going back to the language metaphor, it's not even like learning a foreign language, but like knowing that the people that speak that language are treated a lot differently and a lot worse than you are.
Yeah.
And that again makes it's scary and hard to approach sometimes.
Yeah, and one of the things that my mom helped me, I was talking with her, is that one of the reasons why Black people don't tell us about their experiences is because, first of all, they maybe don't feel like they're in a position of power where they can just tell us what they're really feeling and thinking. But oftentimes, because it's so different from what we're experiencing, and sometimes we feel like, how did I not know this? I'm doing something wrong, and then we can feel bad because we know racism is bad, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody who would say racism is a good thing. Oh yeah, they're blowing up stuff down in Minneapolis.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, no, we do know they exist. Mm-hmm. But nobody that I talk to would say that racism was a good thing. But just because you don't want to be racist doesn't mean you might not actually do or say something that's racist or hurtful. And when we learn about that, our reaction is to feel really bad. Mm-hmm. And in some ways that's normal because we know racism is wrong. And so if someone says, honey, that's racist, that makes you feel shame, like I'm wrong, I'm bad. And that's the reaction. And so one of the things we can do as we're going through this material is when we're like, oh crap, I did that, I said that, oh no. Our reaction is to get defensive, to get emotional, to feel bad. That's normal. But also maybe a tool could be to say,
I'm still learning.
I'm still learning. I'm glad I know that now.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the racist thing in your teeth?
Yes.
Yes, so I took this from a TED Talk. I'll try to find what the reference is later so I can cite it. But a great TED Talk speaker talked about, like, if we talked about racism, like, if somebody has something in their teeth, like, say I had a big, like, Pastor Siri had a big chunk of broccoli in her teeth, and she is running around smiling at everybody, talking to everybody, having all these sermons, and nobody ever tells her. And then later maybe she looks in the mirror, or maybe, I finally say, like, Pastor Siri, I didn't want to tell you, but, like, you have a big chunk of broccoli in your teeth. Mm-hmm. And, like, what is going to be your reaction, Pastor Siri, when I...
Oh my gosh, why? Thank you for telling me. Why didn't anyone tell me sooner? This is so embarrassing. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you maybe ask, like, okay, did I get it?
Did I get it out? Did I get it out? Is it out?
It's like there's a little bit more there.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right.
Okay, oh, yeah.
Got that racism out of my teeth.
Oh, God.
At least
so
that
much
one.
Right.
Yeah,
like,
I feel better, thank you. Yeah.
And you probably wish, if I said, like, actually it was there for like 3 weeks. I just didn't want to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if we approach this with that sense of we are teaching each other where the racism is in us, because we cannot help as human beings who grew up in this country to not be affected by it. Every person of color, every white person, every single person who's born in this country is affected by racism. And so it is not your moral failing when you learn that you might have said or done or contributed to something hurtful, because we all have.
Mm-hmm. And it can be collectivist. We don't think of that as Americans because we're a very individualist culture, but sometimes it's our collective societal fault. It is like this white majority education that we were never told these things.
We were not told these things. So we're learning now. A lot of people are learning and trying to really wake up to a broader reality for the sake of our neighbor, because we love our neighbor. We're told to love our neighbor. And so when our neighbor says, you guys have been stepping on my ankles and my toes. Every time we dance, you're stepping on my toes. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know.
Right, I'm glad you told me, so I don't do that again.
Yep.
If we had more of that response, going back to the, the feet and the food stuck in the teeth, if we have more of that, like, attitude of gratitude, and if I realize I'm always getting food stuck in my teeth, maybe I'm going to look in the mirror more often.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have that awareness. So,
Yeah.
so I can make it better. And I think taking out down that defensiveness and realizing, like, especially if a person of color calls us out, like, they're not doing it from a place of like trying to like be hateful. They're trying to help make us better too, and it's not their job. They don't have to. And so if they're saying something, then we should pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we're going to do, the Living Lutheran had an article several months ago, which was really good, because they were committing to try to raise some awareness, because ELCA is the whitest denomination in America.
Super white.
Like whiter than the Presbyterians and the Methodists. Like we just are super white. And so that is not just heritage. There's some other things that are going on. And in talking with a lot of my other pastor friends, when Black people who visit their church feel comfortable and know them well enough, they'll tell them, this is what I experienced at your church. And it's all these often just little things that make them feel uncomfortable. So we're going to talk about the difference between walking to church while you're white and walking into church while you're Black. So as a European American in the ELCA, I can wear whatever I want to church without judgment. How would that be different for a person of color?
Well, I can imagine that we have some stereotypes and, you know, what's called implicit bias, right? So it's things that maybe from media images or history books we've been led to believe. So if somebody comes in, a person of color, dressed a certain way, like I'm trying to think of like, you know, a stereotype like a chain or something like that, then we might go straight to like gangs or drugs, when that's just a fashion expression, like anything else. But if I'm a person of color walking into church, I'm probably going to think twice about what I'm wearing, because I know people are going to have those associations, even if they don't say something to me.
Yeah, and I heard a good image for that like as white people, we know that white people have a huge variety of expression, a vast variety. And so we'll see a white person come in sweatpants, and we'll have a different reaction to that than if, say, a Black person came in sweatpants, because we have a much narrower focus on African American culture. And so we immediately go to a stereotype rather than the wide range of grace and possibility that we might give to a white person.
Right, because I'm wondering if that example, if we saw a white person in sweatpants, we'd think, oh, well, they probably were tired this morning. Maybe they went to the gym. And if a Black person walks in like that, we might assume that they're homeless.
Yeah, we could.
And that's a much different narrative. And it's not fair, right? Because it's not that it should mean those different things based on the color of somebody's skin.
And oftentimes, as I'm listening to the stories of Black people, there was a guy I just recently said he doesn't go to get the paper off his driveway without getting fully dressed. Because if he walks out in his bathrobe, he knows people are watching him, and they'll assume things like, well, isn't he working? Does he not have a job? And all of this narrative, this negative stuff will subconsciously be put on him. And so he will get dressed to get the paper in his driveway. A lot of times you'll hear people say they have to be completely put together everywhere they go if they want to be taken seriously. And then I think about times in which I've, gotten by with the minimum to run an errand, not worrying about what people were thinking if I was more, what kind of character I had or my life circumstance.
And I think that's the benefit of being white, is that we're given the benefit of the doubt. Good intentions are assumed, and I think that's why we're seeing so much outrage right now from the African American community, is that typically in their experiences they're not given the benefit of the doubt, and it is like the opposite, where they always have to prove themselves.
They have to prove that they're not to be fearful, that they are smart, that they are this, that they are that, whereas oftentimes white people get that benefit until they prove otherwise.
Right, until you're really like doing something horrible, and they're like, oh, and then they
Okay.
say you're a bad apple.
Well, yeah. Oh, that's just a dumb guy. Doesn't represent your whole. I think that's in here.
Yeah, we don't say all white people are like that when somebody behaves badly while white.
Yes. This is interesting. I am not likely to wonder why people choose to introduce or not introduce themselves to me on Sunday morning. I never thought of that. But if you are walking into maybe a predominantly white church and you're black and people come up to you afterwards, do you wonder, are you only coming up to me because you're trying to be diverse? Because you're trying to be liberal? Because you're trying to prove? Like, what do you...
Are you going to be overly friendly because we need more diversity? And there's one in there about a congregational picture too that reminds me about that.
You're asked, when I'm asked to serve in a leadership position, I do not have to wonder if it was to fill a quota or to prove the church's commitment to diversity. Yeah. Creepy. Similarly, when I visit a church for the first time, it's unlikely I will be asked to participate in that congregation's annual membership photo so that my ethnicity can be represented.
Yeah, I've been part of some pretty white organizations, and even on an organizational level, I've seen that happen again and again and again. Or I was a part of a Christian organization that had like one person of color working for that, and she was always asked to be the tour guide, to be in the photos, to do this and to do that. And then when she wanted to leave, it was like, no, you can't leave, because she was the diverse person. And they could treat her badly all the rest of the time, but when she tried to leave, it was like, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And then it's like, well, what are somebody's intentions, and how hard it would be to walk around not knowing if people have good intentions when they introduce themselves.
Yeah.
Or good intentions when they hire you, or good intentions when they ask you to do something.
And I'm sure it's on here, but in those cases, to feel like you're representing your entire race in that moment, day after day after day.
I mean, I remember being in high school, and in my English class, there was only one girl who was black, and she was called on all the time to like represent like diversity or to respond like for all black people. And at that point in my development, I didn't know that was wrong. You know, I also was learning, so I was like, oh, well, that's interesting what she has to say. And now, like, I realize like how much of a burden was placed on her as the only student of color in that class.
Yeah. The music I hear in church will be familiar as a European American. The music I hear in church will be familiar and will likely be written by European Americans. So you can just go through the hymnal and just double check. When theologians are cited, they're likely to share my ethnic background. On Sunday morning, I can choose to stick out or blend in.
Yeah, you really can't do that if you're a person of color, especially when we're talking about spaces that are primarily white occupied, right? Like, like Lutheran spaces in particular.
And I see some of you trying to disappear, chameleon yourself, because you're introverts or you're tired.
I try to chameleon all the time.
Yeah,
when I'm doing music, but.
And then I see other people who kind of love to be the center of attention, and that's cool. I mean, that we're such different personalities, but that's a choice that you can make because...
And a privilege.
A privilege that you can make,
Make that choice and blend in.
Ooh, this is... No one's ever told me that my church is down the street or on the north side.
Yeah, stereotypes.
So I know this has happened where because we have Ebenezer, which is a Liberian congregation that worships at 11-ish down the hallway, I know there's been a couple cases where if someone who is black comes into our sanctuary, there's that assumption or wondering if maybe they are new and they're in the wrong spot. But the fact that that's not unique here, that's like someone might come in and you're like, oh, don't you know the black church is down there? That's got to feel really awkward.
And I've read something somewhere that our churches are actually the most segregated places in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe it's because of things like that.
It's not likely that people will try to talk over me when I'm trying to share. Well, we could talk about mansplaining, but I think that, no, I mean, I've seen that. Now that I'm aware of it, I've witnessed that a lot of times, I see it more and more that if you have a group and there's a person of color there, people will talk over them.
Well, and it's happening all the time in social media right now. Like, I think there's the term like white-splaining.
Say what white-splaining is.
Well, a lot like mansplaining. I don't know if people are familiar with the term.
Explain mansplaining.
So, mansplaining is like when a man will explain, typically to a woman, like in a way that is demeaning and assumes that they don't know anything. Like talking down to them, belittling them as like, oh, I'm the man and I have the answers. Let me explain this to you because clearly you don't know. And now, especially in our social media circles, we're getting white-splaining where a white person will explain to a person of color, well, clearly, like, you're just being emotional right now. You don't understand how it really is. Like, we got rid of racism. You're just reacting in an emotional place, and, not all police officers are bad. This is just, you need to calm down.
You need to calm down.
Which,
Yeah. And again, it's telling a person that their experience or their knowledge or their education or their expertise
or intelligence
is not as valid as the person, and there's usually a power differential, which is when a couple years ago mansplaining came out, where women were tired of being belittled and I can't remember the word. Condescended is a good
talked
word.
down to.
Yeah. When I show up at church, no one assumes I am there to receive financial assistance. No one questions my intellect or seeks to discern how educated I am.
Which is also kind of in that white-splaining category.
Yep. People are rarely surprised by the fact that I am employed or by my choice of career. So think about the interactions you've had with Black people when you first met them, and one of them says, I'm a district attorney, I am a principal, I am a pediatrician. Is there, and the subconscious things that might be going on in our minds.
Right, where we might be surprised because our brains might go to like, oh, you're the fast food worker, you're the cafeteria worker, and that's, not right. We shouldn't assume that, although it is, for people of color, it's often harder for them to attain their educational and career goals because of systems in place to oppress them.
Yeah.
But yet we shouldn't think that it's because of their intellectual capacity.
Yeah, right. When I read scripture in church, no one congratulates me on being so articulate.
Or not having an accent, or I have one of my friends who's Black is often told on the phone after they learn that she's Black, and they'll be like, well, you sounded so white, as if that's supposed to be a compliment. That's something that I've learned, is that as white people, we've created this system, and we assume that our way of behaving and talking and looking is the norm, and that everybody has to basically be sucked into that in order to be better. And this goes from old patterns of behavior that we've had for hundreds of years that's just sort of leaked down almost genetically, right? It's just sort of there, and we're not even consciously aware of it. Why wouldn't we, okay, but it'd be offensive if we did, but why wouldn't we try to sound more Black? Why wouldn't we want to look more that way? Why wouldn't we, it's just getting us to think a little bit about some of our preconceived notions we have on which accents are better. There was about the Midwestern accent. Did you read about that?
There was a TV show called 100 Humans, and
yes, I watched that.
Did you see that? There was a couple of things. Okay, one of them was about accents. They had a woman who was an actor. She was an accent coach, actually, so she could do any accent you asked her to. She gave the same speech 3 times to 3 different groups of people. The first time she had a British accent. The second time she had a Midwest normal accent. And the third time she had a Southern accent. And then they polled the groups and asked what they thought of the speech. That's it. They didn't ask about the accent. They just said, what did you think of the material she gave? Guess what? When she presented in the Southern accent, they liked the material less. They thought it was less relevant.
And that she was less intelligent.
And that she was less intelligent. And so they asked why that was, and it's really just this old history of sort of kind of white supremacy stuff that's sort of in the water, that's just we've inherited, and it's there.
And that's why like a newscasting neutral accent is very Midwestern, because it's the most white.
Yeah.
Like they've done studies about that. And it also made me think of like African American English is just something that recently is like being like coded, because my mom's a speech pathologist, and a lot of kids were getting flagged as having speech problems who are Black because they're speaking actually in a known like variant of English.
Okay.
But it wasn't known as such, right? So we just thought it was bad grammar or like speech problems, when really this is, you know, just like anything, the way we talk, right? We learn from our parents, who learn from their grandparents, and our speech patterns are passed down, but kids were being flagged as like inferior. Yeah, and probably the way they wrote too, you know, because they're writing how they're learning in their families, and that was flagged as like inferior. And so, you know, also in our educational systems, we've inadvertently, because we didn't know, we're not ever forced to learn African American English, so because it's different, we often flag things like that as inferior, which is wrong and racist, even if it wasn't, you know, anything intentional.
Yeah.
Which a lot of these things aren't like, you know, it's covert, not overt. So overt is like when you like call somebody the N-word or blatantly in their face racist, but a lot of the things we're talking about tonight are covert things that fall into the surface, that unless we're like looking in the mirror, unless we're aware and educating ourselves, we may not know. Yeah,
It's things like you didn't even realize that you clutched your purse tighter when a Black person walked by. You didn't even know you did that, and if you knew, you'd be horrified, but it happened because that is deep entrenched in our training, and you can bet they noticed. They noticed because it happens all the time. So, okay. When I visit, people do not ask me, where are you from? No, where are you really from? So,
and I feel like we're saying that somebody doesn't belong, that they're not one of us when we're asking, you know, especially that second one, like, where are you really from? It's like, you couldn't possibly be one of us, is kind of that underlying message.
I've been asked only a handful of times which version of Scandinavian I am, but only with other Scandinavians when we were having a conversation about tradition, like Christmas traditions or something. It's not something every day where people go, are you Norwegian, Swedish, or German? Finnish? Norwegian. Right? That's not something that happens to me because I am the norm. That's what we have portrayed. And so anyone that's further out from that circle of whiteness, the further out you are, the harder it is for you to be in the circle and to be a part of things. And then we'll all make them feel excluded and often be like, well, where are you from? So, you know, Asian woman who's 3rd generation American, she's lived here her whole life in Seattle. Almost every day she might have someone go, where are you from? And that takes a toll. That's called a microaggression, where it's not like a mean thing someone says, but if that's said day after day after day after day after day, eventually you just want to like sock the next person who asks you, because it's so frustrating to feel like you're constantly being told you're not one of us.
And it's hard, things that are harder to talk about because people are unaware that they're being racist.
Yeah.
And, you know, they don't realize that the same person is getting to ask that same thing again and again and again. And
Take
yet
that-
nobody says,
take
like,
that
that's
out
something
of our
racist
teeth.
in your teeth,
You
right?
got something racist in your teeth. Yep. When I enter a room, it's unlikely that people will say to me, I don't see color.
Yeah, which I was reacting to that one because it's ironic, because if you tell somebody of color, right, who clearly, like a person of color, somebody whose skin color is not white, like, then you're clearly noticing that you see color.
Yeah.
Like, you know, not only is it a misnomer, but it
Yeah.
clearly contradicts what you're saying, and it
Yeah.
denies their experience. Because then,
Yes.
then you know, they're treated differently because of the color of their skin, and you say that you're colorblind, you're really not seeing them, and you're
Yeah.
not then having any openness to this experience that's different than yours.
And you're also maybe somehow insinuating there's something wrong with being Black or Asian or Middle Eastern. You're somehow insinuating that, oh, I've accepted you as one of me, a white person, or something. It just feels weird. And so our goal is not to be colorblind. I know that feels like a very liberal, accepting thing to say, but that again denies the very reality that the world and the system that is set up is very color aware. When I walk into a bank, I might get a very different experience. When I walk through my life, I might get a very different experience from the exact same person with the same gifts and talents and intelligence as me, but she's an African American woman. So the world is not colorblind, and so there's no reason to pretend.
No, it's much better to be color conscious.
Color conscious. Lift up the gifts of people who are different. The whole Pentecost thing.
Yeah, lifting people up.
Embrace and enjoy all the colors of the rainbow. Yeah. When I'm in an ELCA church, I can assume I will feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. No one will question whether I'm a real Lutheran.
Yeah, assuming that Lutherans are white. And that somebody who's not white clearly didn't grow up Lutheran.
When I enter the church office, I'm not given directions to the food shelf unless I ask for them. Ouch.
Yeah, they're not very welcoming.
No. When I look at the leadership of my church, it's likely the pastor, council president, and congregational council members will share my ethnicity. At potlucks, I will recognize and enjoy most of the foods brought.
Yeah, we definitely have some stereotypical
We do. I
white
mean,
Midwestern foods.
Midwestern, yeah.
Hot dishes and
Hot dishes and casseroles and
Jello salads.
awesome pistachio whipped deliciousness that probably is very strange to a lot of other people and places. Yeah. When people associate the ELCA with Scandinavian countries or make Ole and Sven jokes, I do not feel left out.
And I don't think we often think about our language and how that can alienate
Yeah,
others.
yeah.
Because we're just, it's like, oh, it's a Scandinavian thing.
Yeah, Lutherans are Scandinavians and we'll make Scandinavian jokes. Oh, you know, we've adopted a couple Irish and a couple, you know, but that can really feel...
Like if I have never heard an Ole and Sven or Ole and Lena joke ever, I'm gonna be like, I'm lost. And
Yeah, is this part of the Bible? Did I miss something?
Was there Noah and Sven?
Yeah, is this what Luther taught? I don't know.
I don't
What
know.
catechism did this come from? Okay. And the last one. When I see a picture of Jesus or the disciples on the wall or in the stained glass window, they are likely to look like me.
Yeah, and I feel like the reaction to that is often like, well, that's just the picture we've always had. But we don't think about like how seeing images of ourselves lead us to think that like Jesus is going to clearly agree with us because he's white and we're white, which, you know, Jesus was Middle Eastern. But, you know, not only like that, does it like feed into that, but also like, you know, somebody walking into your church who's not white and they see this white Jesus, well, how are they going to think that Jesus is somebody that cares about them? Because we do feel like the people that look like us, right, might understand our experience, might care about us. And add a layer onto that, if the Jesus you see in your church looks like somebody who's hurt you, oppressed you, treated you poorly, then I'm going to run the other way.
Yeah, think about that. If your daily reality of frustration and roadblocks and red tape and glass ceilings, and you walk into a church, a place that is supposed to give you comfort and grace and freedom, and the Jesus on the cross is just another one of those guys telling you no. Oh my gosh, that's exhausting. And Jesus wouldn't want that. We know that because he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary," and he came to be incarnate to be with us. So he would want to be represented in a way that we could feel like he's on my side. He's for me. He's with me. He's for me.
Well, yeah, it's like the whole Emmanuel, right?
It's Emmanuel. God with us. God with all of us, not just one particular group.
Not just one race.
So these things are just church, but there's a whole catalog of things that people experience in terms of banking and applying for jobs and trying to get an apartment and so many different things in which the experience of European Americans, white people, have a vastly different experience from black people. And as white people, we're not aware of it. We don't know it, and it's not our experience, so we don't almost believe it could be that way. But I think we'll close maybe by just saying, it's time for us to listen. It's time for us to do the 2 ears and the 1 mouth. Close the mouth and open the ears and seek out the voices of those people who don't look like us and hear their stories and try not to argue and dismiss and just listen and let it unsettle. Because it's unsettling.
It is. It's disturbing, and to listen to the voices of color who are out there.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm aware that as we're speaking, like, we're still 2 white women, and, you know, and I've listened to stories of communities of color, but that's still not my experience. And so that, like, I have to have a lot of humility that, you know, I still can't represent their experience. And so when they do speak up, and because they don't have to, but yeah, like you're saying, like stopping to listen and having more of an attitude of like, of humility, of repentance, like, I'm sorry that's that way for you, you know, tell me more, instead of like saying, well, it can't be, it couldn't be that way.
Yeah.
I didn't do that, I'm not one of them, you know, if we just have that attitude of like, let me be with you.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes it's not even saying anything, you know, it reminds me of that, God with us is being.
It's best to not say anything. Yeah, because a lot of times what we're tempted to do is to be like, oh, yes, we white people, we suck. Oh, I feel so ashamed. Oh, I hate it. Oh, man, I feel so, bad. And, not me, and feeling, making it about us. Just that the hardest thing for us is to just try to be quiet and to listen. And then to turn around. And one of the reasons why we're doing this here is because it can be easier sometimes to say, hey, as white people, we're learning, and we're here to teach you white people, we got stuff to learn. We have stuff to learn. And so to learn to speak up to your fellow white people, so we all open our ears, and things can change for the better.
Right, if we have open hands, open ears,
Open hearts.
open hearts.
Yeah. All right. More next time. Thank you so much for being a part of our first conversations. It's about time.